over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Well, greetings and welcome back as always. Over the past few weeks, there's been a feud between President Trump and Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Trump has repeated his call for Federal Reserve Chair Powell to step down, the latest in a series of attacks that have raised concern about the independence of the U.S. Central Bank. Now, Reuters reports U.S. Treasury's Bessent calls for review of Fed non-monetary policy operations. What's really at the heart of this conflict and why? Oh, and Cherie Eugene O'Neill wrote strange interlude. Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. You know, with each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historic context in which most of these events take place. And instead of looking at some of today's headlines, there are two things that I need to say, and I'm going to beg my guests' indulgence for a moment. The first is Laith Marouf was released last night from 3 days in captivity. He is well and resting after 3 days without sleep. So Laith is doing well. He is back with his family after having been arrested and detained. Second, late last night, I was listening to an NPR program talking about Palestine and what's happening in Gaza. And they made the point that Palestinians in Gaza are starving. Folks, Palestinians in Gaza are not starving. I repeat, that's just not true. They're not starving. Palestinians in Gaza are being starved to death. And there's a difference. If there was a natural catastrophe, an act of God, a drought that burned up all the agriculture and killed all the grazing plants so the animals die, and as a result of this, people cannot get food, they go hungry and starve to death. That's one thing. Or a plague of locusts descends upon the land and eats up all the crops, and therefore people cannot get access to food, they go hungry, and they starve to death. That's another thing. But that's not what's happening in Gaza. In Gaza, there is food. There is relief available. Medical aid is available. It's rotting in trucks sitting on the border, not being allowed to enter into the country. People are not starving. A decision has been made to use food and aid as a weapon to starve the Palestinians into submission. Decisions have been made by the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, and the U.S. Congress to use food and aid as a weapon. People are directed to particular areas They go to those areas for aid. They're told that aid will be provided to them. And then when they arrive, snipers shoot them in the head, shoot their children in the head. One more point, and I appreciate my guest patience here, but I had to say this. Some listening to this might think, well, Wilmer, this is a distinction without a difference. Starvation is starvation and dead is dead. That's true, but that's not the point. It's about causation and solutions. If the drought hits or the locusts come, those are acts of God. And other nations can assist in ameliorating the circumstance, not solve the problem, but minimize the number of people who are starving. When people are being starved to death, that's the result of a decision to weaponize food, withhold food, and cause people to die. That's collective punishment. That's a war crime. That's genocide. The solution, since you can't change the weather, is change the decision. There's a difference between being starving and being starved. You can't change the weather. You can change the decision. On today's episode, the issue before us is the fight between Fed Chair Jerome Powell and Donald Trump. My guest is a professor at the Department of Political Studies and director of the Geopolitical Economy Research Group. She's the author of a number of books and a true favorite of mine and a favorite of this show, Dr. Radhika Desai. As always, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me, Leon. And I have to say, I wasn't having to be patient at all. I think I was listening very carefully to what you were saying. I'm very happy that Laith Marouf has been released. And you could not be more right about the difference between starving and being starved. And I'll say just add one more thing, because, you were just made such an excellent number of points. And it is that if it was indeed a situation of real famine, you would have a flood of international aid in there in no time. But it is the Israeli army that is preventing not only the aid that's already there from going in, but of course preventing any other aid from going in. And they have created this obscene, horrific, murderous aid scheme in which people who come for food get killed. I mean, it is just beyond belief. It is absolutely beyond belief, and it makes one question the humanity of oneself. How can you witness all this and continue? I mean, becomes the big issue. But yeah, these are the most important issues. Though,
Well, and final point on this, in listening to NPR, in listening to a lot of Western media cover this, and I don't know if this is intentional on their part or if they just honestly think that this is the accurate way to describe the circumstance. But again, I don't think what I articulated is a distinction without a difference. And when the media talks about people starving, that is almost innocuous as it relates to the cause of the starvation. So that's why I say, you can't change the weather. If it were famine or if it were locusts, you can't change that. But this is simply a decision that has been made to weaponize food. This is collective punishment. This is the definition of collective punishment. This is a war crime, and Donald Trump and the U.S. members of Congress, all the way down to the Congressional Black Caucus, they are complicit in this war crime.
And again, just sorry to continue, but it is a very important subject. And let me tell you that just the other day, I think yesterday, it was remarkable that I watched a clip of a conservative member of parliament, a Tory member of parliament here in the UK, telling the Labour foreign minister that he had to do something, that not doing something was complicity in what you are rightly calling war crime, rightly calling genocide. And he even warned David Lammy, the foreign secretary, that if he continued this complicity, he may himself be called before the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. And I think that these are because you see, unlike the United States, Britain is a signatory
Mhm.
to this court, and so in that sense, I think that these are extremely and the fact is, a Tory MP is saying that because basically the humanity of everyone has been shaken to the core by what we are witnessing. So one hopes that things seem to be going up to a crescendo, that something happens in the next day or two, because honestly I don't know how long this can go on.
Trump has made the call for Powell to quote unquote resign. And now Scott Bessent said a review should be conducted into the Fed's decision to launch a massive renovation project of its headquarters at a time when it is posting operation losses. He did not say who should conduct the review, adding that he has no knowledge or opinion on the legal basis of the project. This whole thing about the renovation of the building versus the policy, what is this about, Professor Desai?
So it's okay. It's essentially about the fact that Trump would like the Federal Reserve to do a number of things that he wishes it to do. The first of these is, of course, lowering interest rates, which the Federal Reserve is reluctant to do. By the way, none of this should be seen as an endorsement of the Federal Reserve's position. I do not endorse the current Federal Reserve's policies. I'm merely describing them rather than endorsing them. The Federal Reserve does not wish to lower interest rates because, according to the Federal Reserve, it will only give rise to further inflation. It will only further fuel inflation, which will undermine the value of the dollar. And it is one of the remits of the Federal Reserve to keep the dollar's value stable. And it is at the moment declining rather rapidly, as we have read in the papers recently. The dollar has had the worst opening 6 months of the year since 1973.
Wow.
If you remember, and you and I will remember, but 1973 was when oil prices were quadrupled, which was both the cause and consequence of the rapid decline in the dollar as it was then. So in this situation, and it came right on the heels of the breaking of the link between the dollar and gold and all of these things. Anyway, so basically, the first point of dispute between the administration of Donald Trump and the Federal Reserve, the governors of the Federal Reserve, including the chairman of the Board of Governors, is this issue of interest rates. I think there are second and other issues. Another equally important issue is that the Trump administration would like the Federal Reserve, which is also in charge of regulating the financial sector, to deregulate it even further. We have already had 4.5 decades of deregulation, which is why we have also had the financially most rocky 4.5 decades with stock market crashes, other asset bubbles breaking and so on. And now we are sitting on top of the so-called everything bubble. Basically, every asset market in the United States is wildly inflated, way beyond any underlying value justifying it. Now, the Trump administration would like the Federal Reserve to deregulate further and, in particular, be open to cryptocurrencies, which, as you know, the Trump administration, Trump himself, his wife Melania, and other cronies are trying to benefit from. So these are some of the disagreements that the Trump administration has with the Federal Reserve, and the Trump administration would dearly love to put in the place of Jay Powell someone who would be more pliable, somebody who would be willing to do the bidding. Indeed, we read also that there is some possibility, or the possibility that Scott Bessent, the current Treasury Secretary himself, may be one of the candidates to fill the shoes of Jay Powell as soon as Jay Powell ceases to be the chairman of the Board of Governors. So, these are the disagreements. But recent judgment in the U.S. Supreme Court, which was about the case of a senior administrator of, I think, some kind of a labor board or something.
Yes.
Which was an important test case, and maybe you can provide the details. But it was, what was the test case? Maybe you can tell us first, and then I can continue.
Well, I'm going to have to look that up. But I know that
the thing is,
go ahead.
Yeah. So this senior head of the Labor Reserve Board, the Trump administration had something against her, so he tried to fire her. The Supreme Court said that she could not be fired for essentially for any policy she pursued, because this was an independent thing. She could only be fired for some kind of misconduct. And that is why they are bringing up this bizarre case of the refurbishment of a building. Now, I'm sure there are many buildings that have been refurbished at great expense and great cost overruns in the US administration. Even if these things are true, it may even be that these are trumped up charges, but even if these charges were true, the fact that the Trump administration is making such a to-do about it is precisely because of the Supreme Court judgment. And so they're trying to find a way of getting at Jay Powell and getting rid of him in order to essentially have someone in place who will do their bidding on the matter of interest rates, on the matter of deregulation, on the matter of cryptocurrencies, and so on. Because remember, and this is the last thing I want to say about this, the Trump administration is essentially, at least originally, it was backed by those people who are not even satisfied with the degree of deregulation conducted over the last 4.5 decades, with the degree to which capital has been unburdened from any regulations, any constraints, labor unions, and taxation. So they want even more. And this is the kind of administration we're looking at. The administration must do something to please these guys, because after all, they have bankrolled the Trump administration. And very soon, by around this time next year, the Trump administration and the Republican Party will be looking for more money to contest the midterms.
And I think it's important to reiterate, and you're right, that a recent Supreme Court decision has said that the chair can't be fired only for cause. And so now the Trump administration seems to be trying to make the case that the renovation project of their building is so mismanaged that that's the cause that they want to try to use to remove Jerome Powell. But what they, I think, are omitting from all of this are a couple of things. One is the plan to renovate the building was submitted during the first Trump administration and approved by the National Capital Planning Commission. So, and then the second point is Jerome Powell isn't acting in a unitary position. He's just the chair of a board, and the whole board approved it. And the final point is, contrary to what Donald Trump said in his last press conference, he's the one, not Joe Biden, that appointed Jerome Powell in the first place.
Exactly. In fact, let me just say that in all of this, like, while of course I don't wish anybody to be unfairly targeted, and I think Jerome Powell is probably being unfairly targeted by Trump, because, having said that, I wouldn't say that Jay Powell is the nicest guy or the
Okay.
most, the guy that everybody should go around defending, because the fact is that he is part of a Federal Reserve establishment that has landed the United States in the trouble it's in today. For example,
Okay.
if you look at the series of financial crises, and the one that even the biggest one of them all that we are probably going to see or unfold very soon. In fact, one can argue that it has already started. It already started with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and those other small banks in California, and so on. But be that as it may, the point is that it is the policies of the Federal Reserve that has systematically deindustrialized the United States. It has therefore systematically been responsible for taking away good jobs, which most people yearn for, and so on. It has systematically promoted systematically promoted the inequality that you see in the United States today, with these obscene figures that some 1% of Americans own more than 50% of all the wealth in the United States, and so on. So all of these results, all of these outcomes can be placed squarely at the door of the Federal Reserve. Jay Powell, I don't care who appointed Jay Powell, it's neither here nor there because he belongs to the same establishment. Because remember, it was in the 1990s in particular that the so-called independence of central banks was made into a big issue. The Federal Reserve was already technically independent, but the point is that we are told that the independence of the Federal Reserve means that, it makes monetary policy impartially in the
Mhm.
interests of the American economy and ordinary people. But that is simply misunderstanding what independence is all about. Independence just means that the Federal Reserve should not be subject to any democratic control. It
Mhm.
means that it should remain the plaything. It should remain under the control of the big financial corporations that rule today in the United States. In fact, it's very interesting, that back in the 1970s, when inflation was very high, but so was unemployment. The I guess it would have been the Carter administration, but anyway, in the late 1970s, there was a law passed which mandated the Federal Reserve with not just having one policy aim, which is to keep inflation low and keep the value of the dollar stable, but two mandates, which was also to keep inflation low. So this is generally known as the dual mandate. But no sooner has had this law been passed than Carter appointed Paul Volcker as the chairman of the Federal Reserve, the chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. And why had he selected Paul Volcker? Because Paul Volcker was widely known to be a man who was committed to, slaying the dragon of inflation. And then he proceeded to do it by effectively raising interest rates so high as to cause the famous double dip recession and
Mhm.
subject American working people to a prolonged period of extremely high unemployment. So, from the get go, employment levels have never been anything the Federal Reserve has taken seriously. To be sure, it uses keeping employment high as a way of justifying keeping interest rates low in the long, almost 2 decade long period during which the Federal Reserve pursued a policy of low interest rates. But although they justified in the name of keeping unemployment low, in reality, they all the money, the low interest rate, the benefit of the low interest rates and other loose monetary policy principles went primarily to big financial institutions who were able to borrow for nothing. And this was one of the key reasons why you had all these asset bubbles because
Mhm.
of leverage trading. You borrow money cheaply to throw into speculative trading. You buy assets, you wait for the value to rise for a short period, the value rises, you then sell those assets, you take your profits, and then you essentially yeah you pay the very small amount of interest that you have to pay in a regime of low interest rates. So low interest rates have never served to make it easier for ordinary people to borrow, to allow the productive economy to thrive. They have only served to inflate asset bubbles over the last 2 decades, 2.5 decades.
How much do you think of Donald Trump's ire towards Powell is really just he's trying to find a convenient target to blame, since his other policies, the trade war, the sanctions war, these things are failures, and many now are looking at the rise of inflation, that inflation now is starting to tick up as a result of these just total asinine policies by Trump. And he sees Jerome Powell as a convenient target.
I think it's probably a combination. Like, I completely agree with you that, of course, Trump has had so many policy failures that he must pull a new rabbit out of the hat at every turn, because otherwise people will actually focus on his policy failures and say, explain this. So if he keeps changing the subject all the time, then at least he's spared having to explain his policy failures, which are numerous. Whether we talk about tariffs or whether we talk about reindustrialization, whether we talk about the whatever
Mm-hmm.
the so-called wars he was going to end, it's a long list. So okay, and of course we now have the Epstein affair, which is very compromising, I would say, for Donald Trump. Indeed, um, I would say that these failures, these policy failures, and to top it all, the Epstein affair, the fact that Elon Musk has created his own party, which might be endangering the support for Trump, etc. All of these things are kind of, they are very real and so on. But the Trump administration really does have a problem with Jay Powell, because at this point in time, like I said, they want him to lower interest rates. Now, he can't lower interest rates because inflation is way too high, and the Federal Reserve will not permit itself to fight inflation in any other way. They could fight inflation in much more benign ways, in ways that are going to be, good for the working class. But no, they would rather cause a recession to bring down interest rates. There's a economist. I'm suddenly reminded of the economist Robert Solow, who likened this way of dealing with inflation. And of course, he had primarily Paul Volcker's um, policies in mind. When, if you remember, under Paul Volcker, interest rates were at one point close to 20%
Mm-hmm.
per annum. The federal funds rate, forget what people were actually paying off from on a retail basis. So he called this way of dealing with inflation, he called it burning your house to roast a pig.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is, it is completely excessive. You can roast a pig in your fireplace, or whatever, or in your kitchen, but you can't. You shouldn't be burning your house down. I mean, but that's the equivalent. So, but the other thing is that, you see, the Federal Reserve is caught at the moment in a dilemma. On the one hand, Trump acts as if uh, Powell is going to do a Volcker. Powell cannot do a Volcker, for the simple reason that when Volcker allowed interest rates to go up, he didn't have to worry about the asset bubbles.
Mm-hmm.
There were, there may have been minor asset bubbles here or there, but they were not so systemically important to the economy. Today, the United States economy grows, if it does, only because of asset bubbles, because
Mm-hmm.
only the wealthy people who benefit from these asset bubbles are actually spending any money. Everybody else is living hand to mouth, having difficulty even paying for the things that you can't get away without paying for. That is, you've got to pay your rent, you've got to pay your hospital bills, you've got to pay your loans, you've got to pay your utilities, etc. And that's basically what people are ending up paying for. There is discretionary spending is next to zero for the overwhelming majority of the people of the United States. So to come back to this, on the one hand, he has these asset bubbles, which the last time interest rates went beyond about 5.25%, the housing and credit bubbles burst. So now they have brought them up to about 5.25%. And since then, that was already like 2 or 3 years ago. And since then, Powell has been chanting the mantra of higher for longer, because he certainly cannot allow them to go higher. And many people would actually argue that interest rates, given how high inflation is, interest rates are actually not that high. Real interest rates are not
Mhm,
that high. Because
mhm,
real interest rate is the nominal interest rate minus the inflation rate. So if you've got inflation of 3.25% and nominal interest rates of 5.25%, then you've got inflation only of 2% in real terms.
mhm,
So anyway, the point is that the Federal Reserve is caught in a bind because they cannot raise interest rates for fear of uh, bursting the bubbles, and they cannot lower interest rates for fear of increasing inflation. So this is where, or allowing inflation to go even more out of control. So this is where the Federal Reserve is. The economy, by the way, even independently of all this, is doing very badly, largely thanks to Trump's tariff shenanigans, which is creating all this uncertainty. It is, if basically business people are not going to invest in a climate of uncertainty. And if they are not investing, and of course the Trump administration would never dream of undertaking any substantial program of state investment, then you basically have a very sluggish economy, and the American working people are suffering from it.
Switching gears, um, and switching gears to talk about uncertainty. The Trump's shift in policy towards Ukraine. He has a new deal for Ukraine. He announced that there's an arms agreement with NATO. European countries are going to buy weapons from the United States and then send those supplies of weapons to Ukraine. Uh, the deal, for now anyway, seems to mark a shift in policy towards the conflict. And folks need to realize you wrote a book, or you co-authored a book, Russia, Ukraine, and Contemporary Imperialism. So Donald Trump goes from, on the campaign trail, telling us, oh, I can end this in a day. I'm going to get in the office, get Vlad on the phone. I'm going to say, look, time to end this. Well, Vlad ain't listening. So, Dr.
Sure.
Desai.
I mean, I have been puzzling this. So, first of all, let me say that yes, I co-edited a book along with my Alan Freeman and Boris Kavalitsky called Russia, Ukraine, and Contemporary Imperialism. That was about in 2017 or thereabouts. But since then, I've also written a book called Capitalism, Coronavirus, and War. I mean, originally it was just going to be called Capitalism and Coronavirus because it was really about how the pandemic showed the weaknesses of the capitalist economy, and they made the weaknesses worse. They made capitalism even more weak. So this combination of things I felt was really telling
Mhm.
on capitalism. But anyway, and then I had to add the war because I was delayed in finishing it, and by early 2022 we already had the war going on. So and it, to my mind, related to the same sort of problems of capitalism that I was talking about. So anyway, so if people are interested, by the way, that second book, Capitalism, Coronavirus, and War, is available open access for people who want to
Okay.
access it. But anyway, so let's come to Trump and this whole thing that he has about how he is a peacemaker.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere I'm sure that in his fondest imaginations of who he really is, he thinks of himself as, I'm a deal maker, I can make a deal, etc. Although I should add that when you see him in action making a deal, he actually comes across as a bully, as a
Mm-hmm.
mafioso, someone who will make you an offer you cannot refuse. So, that's but let's leave that aside. But there is another thing, because if you cast your mind back to his first administration, you will remember that there was all this crazy stuff going on with North Korea. So
Mm-hmm.
one day, he was calling Kim Jong-un Rocket Man, and Kim Jong-un was calling him a dotard. And another day they were saying, oh, we love each other, we are writing each other love letters and blah, blah. And I think, I remember at that time reading very closely the accounts that were given of why it failed. Because, if he had succeeded in resolving the problem, it would have made a big difference, I would say, both to the security of the United States and to security and stability of the DPRK,
Mm-hmm.
the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And remember also that the reason why there was all this flurry of activity is that just in the months before Trump was elected, North Korea demonstrated its capacity to essentially tested missiles
Mm-hmm.
that could reach the west coast of the United States. And
Yep.
this gave rise to a bunch of anxiety about
Mm-hmm.
this in Washington and so on. So, okay. But essentially, Trump is this odd guy who seems to think that he can walk in and jolly people along and make them all agree and everything will be fine. I'm sorry, Donald, like that's not how it works. You have to do the hard work of taking the other side's point of view seriously. You have to take in your back pocket some concessions you'll be able to make, and you have to then demand the concessions which you can realistically expect the other side to make. But there is no, he has this fond dream that somebody's going to give him the Nobel Peace Prize.
Mm-hmm.
He's been this has been a thing with him right from the
Right.
first time, and now so that's the thing. So essentially, to come back now to the Ukraine issue, I think he simply once again thought that he and Putin have a nice relationship. Of course, Putin is going to be a good friend, and he would agree, and everything will be fine, and everybody, Volodymyr and Vladimir will agree with one another, and everything will be fine. No, he had absolutely no idea the long history
Correct.
that has led to the current conflict. The bad faith assurances that the West and the United States had given to Gorbachev, going back to the days of Gorbachev, about how NATO would not expand 1 inch eastward, uh, assurances that are actually formal, legal. They are, violating them is a violation of international law or the obligations of the
Mm-hmm.
United States. Nevertheless, the United States has done all of these things. Trump had absolutely no conception of any of this. So he simply expected that, somehow on his say so, Putin would suddenly do what he wanted. This is not going to happen. So anyway, so what you are now seeing is a situation in which uh, not being able to make the peace and win the Nobel Peace Prize, etc., he's now reduced to some very tawdry type of transactions. On the one hand, with Zelensky, there was that strange case of the questionable minerals of Ukraine, on which they did a deal, and then now he wants to do a deal with the Europeans, which essentially means selling arms to European governments, American arms to European governments, which they will then supply to Ukraine. I mean, all of this is just too long. And one also reads that these arms that the Europeans want to supply, I mean, beyond what they have already in stock, is going to take years to manufacture and
Mm-hmm.
deliver. Meanwhile, Ukraine is about this far away from defeat. You're already reading that they are being overwhelmed by these salvos of drones and missiles
Yes.
that the Russians are sending every day. Their capacity to defend themselves from it are reduced. It is also being rumored that there is a lot of opposition to Zelensky that is manifesting itself in the streets of Ukraine. I've also read speculation, anyway, that this popular mobilization against Zelensky is being encouraged by the United States because, of course, this is just another one of their color revolutions because they now find Zelensky a little bit of a problem. So they will want to discredit him, remove him, etc. And Presumably, Zelensky has his own reasons for staying in power, not least because once he leaves power, he's probably toast, at least is politically toast, if not personally toast.
Yes.
So, all of these things are coming into play, but there is no way that, a lot of what the Trump administration advertises as these great victories, yes, the Europeans are going to buy arms, sure, but when? Like in 10 years' time, in 5 years' time, like you won't even be in office at that point. So, it's all again, Trump always wants to make it look like he's winning, even though he may be manifestly losing. So, yeah.
And Kevin Baptiste, thank you for that $10 super sticker and your comment. So, Professor Desai, is it safe to say Trump is not trying to tear down the system, but rather repurpose it? Am I wrong here?
I wish I could even say that. Like, one of the things I often end up saying is that what Trump wants is immaterial because he's not going to get it. Trump is not an actor. Trump is not somebody who can accomplish anything. Trump is a symptom of the very deep crisis in which the United States finds itself. It's a crisis that is an economic crisis. It is so there is a economic deindustrialization, financialization, inequality. On top of that, then because of all those underlying situations, you get social division. So the United States is divided as remember even before Trump's election, the years before, even under Biden, people were writing books about how the United States was close to civil war.
Mm-hmm.
I think, in fact, in some past discussions, we have even discussed that, Wilma. So, this is the situation we're in. So, you have these social divisions, you have political logjam. You have this thing where, Trump can say, I can go out tomorrow and kill somebody on an open, crowded street, and still people will vote for me. So, he has his diehard supporters. On the other hand, he had his diehard opponents. So American society is divided. Culturally, things are going pear-shaped. So in every possible way, so Trump is a symptom because, one way to think about Trump is how many things have to go wrong before somebody like Trump gets elected to high
Mm-hmm.
office.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now let's come to the question. Is he trying to repurpose the system or to destroy it? I think Trump is not, Trump, of course, in one way, he would dearly love to repurpose it because, he serves the same corporate capitalist class as Biden serves. So he would just love to just change enough so that these people remain in power. But quite frankly, I think that as you already see, he's, in order to stay in power, in order to make it look as if he's keeping his electoral promises, he's having to undertake all sorts of initiatives like his crazy tariff drama where,
Mm-hmm.
on again, off again tariff thing. It just shows that basically the system is running out of options. It's not, I mean, Trump is not particular, it's not like Trump has any serious strategy whether to preserve capitalist rule or to make America great again, or whatever you may say his purpose is. He doesn't really have a strategy. So he's just going whichever way that the forces push him. So I would say that, yeah, so he's neither, I mean, whatever he's trying to do, he's not going to either repurpose it. And the destruction part, I mean, he's just going to become part of a new chapter in the self destruction of the United States. And the only thing that's going to save the United States is if there is a viable left wing political force that will say, okay, by left wing, I mean, for those who don't feel that left and right are relevant anymore, let me just say a political force that really speaks for ordinary Americans
Mm-hmm.
in an inclusive way, not just, the white working class or whatever, but all Americans, because if you divide American society, you're not going to get anywhere. So, Americans of every race, color, and creed, every class except perhaps the extreme top. And I think that if you can have such a force, but the thing is that decades of propaganda against such options have left the United States, like much of the rest of the world, much of the Western world, in a situation where such forces don't exist. So what you get is you get Biden type, or the decades, 4.5 decades of neoliberalism, against which, of course, a lot of people are dissatisfied, and the only people who are there to capitalize on the discontents of neoliberalism are people like Trump, because you have simply not allowed anything better to exist for so many decades. But some such force has to emerge. Otherwise, you will simply see the further unfolding of the self-destruction of the United States. I mean, self-destruction as a collective, yeah.
And to your point, I think another example or data point to support what you're saying is that's why the Democrats aren't offering anything. They, all you hear from them, thank God for Jeffrey Epstein, because that is what the Democrats have latched onto as the narrative du jour, because they're not offering any substantive policy to push back on the big, ugly boondoggle that Donald Trump calls the big, beautiful bill. Leon Henneking, thank you for that $5 super sticker. A huge fan of Dr. Desai. Yes, we are lucky to have access to listen to her outside of a classroom, and you're smart to share her links with everybody, because I do as well. But again, and then Robert Brown, thank you for that $10 super sticker. Greatly appreciate that. But again, folks, I think this Epstein issue, and I wanted to just quickly get your take on how is it playing in London, because London has a whole class of tabloid journalism. So how is this issue playing across the pond, as we might say?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, let me say that, yeah, I mean, the Democrats are in such a big disarray that I don't think they're going to be able to find their way out of a paper bag anytime soon. I mean, look at the way in which they have reacted to Zohran Mamdani's victory in New
Mhm.
York. The fact is that, you know, his sort of politics could be seen as a sort of way out. But of
Mhm.
course, they are busy. They'd rather attack him than
Yes.
go with him. So that really shows you the level of uh, dysfunction into which the Democrats have been thrown, the level of disarray. But come to Epstein. I mean, first, and I think in London, I don't think it's any particularly any different. People in here, there is a certain there's a sense in which the term Anglosphere means something. I mean, everybody's talking to everybody else within the Anglosphere at one
Mhm.
level. But of course, here, the Prince Andrew angle,
Yes.
an important one. So, of course, one hears, about how this is going to play out. But and there have been, and I haven't followed them. So maybe another time we talk, I will have followed up by them. But there is some, speculation about some other politicians as well. But let me not say that. I do want to say a couple of things about the Epstein affair, because it seems to me that over this period, when I said earlier that even culture in the United States is, really badly affected,
Mhm.
this is part of it. What we have seen over the last 4.5 decades is increasing inequality. And one of the elements that you get when you have obscene levels of inequality is that you get a tiny sliver of the extremely privileged who feel that they can do anything. I mean, to me, it is so shocking that these people, their conception of doing whatever they want is to violate children, because that's what it amounts to.
Mhm.
They are in the business of violating children, and they feel that their ability to violate children with impunity is a sign of their privilege, it's a sign that they have arrived, it's a sign of their power. And I mean, how completely debased you have to be to think
Mhm.
this way. But and to me, what it seems to now that Trump has suddenly is fighting shy of publishing this list is that it must be. I mean, one of the possibilities you have to consider is that, and we know that Trump himself was a good friend of Jeffrey Epstein. Um, so the fact is that it is quite possible that there is a bipartisan complicity in this affair, and that if all the beans should be spilled, then they would all be caught with their trousers down, so to speak. And this is what Trump is presumably trying to prevent. Obviously, he used popular anger about such things to get elected, but now that he's elected, he doesn't need to comply with what he promised. I mean, election promises are just that. They are promises for the election in order to get elected, not necessarily to be carried out, not by people like Donald Trump.
Dr. Radhika Desai, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate that analysis. And we look forward to having you back.
Absolutely, Wilma. That would be great. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, folks. I want to thank again my guest, Dr. Desai, for joining us today. And thank you all so much for listening to and contributing to the Connecting the Dots podcast. New episode tomorrow. Dimitri Lascaris will be joining us tomorrow. Also, please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.